The evening was quiet, and the little diner on the corner of the street smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread. A young woman walked in slowly, carrying the weight of a long day on her shoulders. She wasn't dressed fancy, just in her simple clothes, and her tired eyes showed how much effort she had put into working and trying to make ends meet. She found a small booth by the window and slid into the seat, quietly ordering a simple meal for herself. The diner wasn't crowded, but a few people were scattered around, either finishing late dinners or sipping their drinks in silence. As she waited for her food, she noticed an elderly woman near the counter. The woman was small and frail, her hands trembling slightly as she dug into her old purse. The cashier repeated the total, and the elderly woman looked embarrassed, counting coins slowly, her fingers shaking. She whispered something about not having enough, and her voice was low, almost breaking. The air grew heavy for a moment, and people nearby noticed but quickly looked away. Some turned back to their phones, others pretended they didn't hear. It was one of those moments when everyone saw, but no one wanted to get involved. The young woman couldn't take her eyes off the scene. She knew the struggle of not having enough. She knew the feeling of standing at a counter, afraid people would judge her. Her heart softened as she watched the older woman try to hold her dignity, but the cashier was getting impatient, tapping on the counter, waiting for the money. The young woman felt a sudden pull inside her chest, a voice telling her she couldn't just sit and watch. She got up quietly and walked to the counter. The older woman didn't notice her at first. The young woman spoke softly to the cashier, sliding her own card forward. "Add her meal to mine," she said gently. The cashier blinked, then quickly swiped it. The elderly woman turned around, her eyes wide, almost in disbelief. For a second, she seemed lost for words, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." The young woman smiled warmly. "It's all right. Please, enjoy your meal." She said it simply, like it was nothing, but in her heart she knew it was everything at that moment. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, her hands cold and fragile, and gave the young woman a soft squeeze of gratitude. "Thank you, dear. Thank you so much." Her voice cracked, but it was filled with genuine emotion. The young woman didn't linger for recognition. She gave a small nod and returned to her table, as if nothing had happened. The other customers went back to their food and conversations, but the moment stayed heavy in the air. The elderly woman sat down slowly, her meal brought to her soon after, and she ate with tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. It wasn't just about the food. It was about being seen, being cared for. When she had expected nothing but silence, the young woman watched from her booth, but she didn't stare. She respected the woman's space, only stealing glances now and then, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. She didn't have much money herself, but something about helping someone in need felt more satisfying than any meal she could buy. Her food arrived, and she ate slowly, her thoughts still circling around the small moment she had just shared with a stranger. She finished her dinner and paid quietly, giving one last look at the elderly woman, who smiled weakly in return. It wasn't the kind of smile you see every day. It carried deep gratitude, the kind that stays in memory for a lifetime. The young woman stepped outside into the cool night, the street lamps casting soft glows on the empty road. She pulled her coat tighter, the chill biting against her skin, but inside her heart felt warm. On her walk home, she replayed the scene in her head, not because she wanted praise, but because it reminded her that kindness still mattered in a world that often looked away. She thought about how many times she herself had wished someone would step in during her hardest moments, and tonight, she got to be that person for someone else. It made her feel light, almost free, as if she had given more to herself than she had given to the elderly woman. The night was quiet, only the sound of her footsteps against the pavement. She reached her small apartment and sank into the chair by the window, looking out at the city lights in the distance. She felt tired, but it was a different kind of tired, A good tired, the kind that comes when your heart is at peace. She whispered softly to herself. It was nothing big. Just a meal. Yet deep inside, she knew it had been something more. Something bigger than either of them realized at that moment. What she didn't know was that the choice she made inside that little diner was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. Asterisk. The night passed quietly, and by morning the young woman was still carrying the memory of the diner in her heart. She woke up early, the sunlight creeping softly through the thin curtains of her small room. The bed was warm, but she stretched slowly and got up, feeling that same gentle peace she had gone to sleep with. The act she had done the night before seemed small in her mind, yet she couldn't shake off the warmth it had left behind. As she made her breakfast, a simple slice of bread with tea, her thoughts returned to the elderly woman. She wondered if the woman had made it home safely, if she had enjoyed her meal without worry, if she had felt even a little bit lighter because of that tiny gesture. The young woman didn't want to overthink it, but deep inside, she felt a quiet joy that her small effort had touched someone's life, even if only for a moment. After eating, she prepared for her day. Her life wasn't easy. She lived in a small apartment that creaked whenever she moved, the kind of place where walls were thin and neighbors' voices slipped through. She worked hard every day, sometimes in jobs that didn't pay much, just enough to keep herself going. There were bills stacked on the table, and she often worried how she would manage the next month. But despite those worries, she had learned to smile through the struggles. That was why, when she saw the elderly woman at the diner, she couldn't ignore her. She knew exactly how it felt to be helpless, to feel that the world was moving too fast while you were left behind. Walking to her job, she thought again about how others in the diner had looked away. People had seen the old woman struggling, yet no one wanted to get involved. It wasn't that they were bad people, maybe they were afraid. Maybe they felt it wasn't their responsibility. But it made her realize how important it was not to stay silent. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes you just have to be the one who cares." The words stayed with her, making her steps feel a little lighter. At work, she moved through her usual tasks, but her mind kept drifting. She caught herself smiling at customers more warmly, speaking more kindly to strangers, even holding the door open longer than usual. That single moment in the diner had reminded her of something she often forgot. Kindness spreads. She didn't expect anything in return. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need recognition. She just wanted to believe that people could still look out for each other in a world that sometimes felt too cold. During her lunch break, she sat outside on a bench, the cool air brushing against her face. She took out a small notebook she carried and began to scribble thoughts, something she did often when she felt heavy inside. She wrote about the elderly woman, about how her eyes had shone with tears when someone stepped in to help her. She wrote about how it reminded her of her own grandmother, who used to struggle with simple things but always carried dignity in her heart. Writing it down made her realize just how deeply that moment had touched her. By the time evening came, she was exhausted, but in a strange way, she felt content. She walked back home slowly, the city glowing with lights. Every face she passed reminded her that everyone was fighting their own silent battles, and sometimes all it took was one kind gesture to make the fight a little easier. She looked up at the sky, where stars were faint but visible, and she whispered, "I hope she's okay. I hope she felt cared for." Back in her apartment, she cooked a small meal and ate quietly, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. She didn't know it then, but while she was living her ordinary day, somewhere else, someone was talking about her. The elderly woman she had helped had not kept the story to herself. She had shared it with someone important, someone who had listened carefully, someone who would not let such kindness go unnoticed. The young woman ended her day sitting by her window again, sipping tea and watching the street below. People came and went, rushing with their own worries, but she sat still, her heart calm. She thought about how life often felt like a struggle, But moments like last night reminded her that small actions could brighten not just her own path but also someone else's. She didn't know that destiny was already at work, that the kindness she had given so freely would soon circle back to her in ways she couldn't imagine. She only knew that her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, and as she leaned her head against the window, she drifted into sleep with a quiet smile on her face. The next morning, however, her world would no longer be the same. The morning began like any other. The young woman stirred awake to the sound of birds outside her window, their gentle chirping mixing with the distant hum of the city waking up. She stretched, rubbed her eyes, and pulled herself out of bed, ready to face another ordinary day. The air was crisp, and she opened her small window to let the fresh breeze flow in. She didn't have much planned except her usual work, and in her mind, it was just another day to keep moving forward. She made tea and prepared a piece of bread with butter, humming quietly to herself. Everything felt calm, almost too calm, as if the world was holding its breath. Then came the knock. It wasn't a light knock, not the kind neighbors used when they wanted to borrow something. It was firm, deliberate, echoing through her small apartment. She froze, her cup halfway to her lips. For a moment, she thought she might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, strong enough to make her heart race. She placed her cup down carefully, her hands trembling just a little. She wasn't expecting anyone. No friends ever visited, and no deliveries were due. Who could it be this early in the morning? Cautiously, she walked to the door. Her apartment wasn't large, so it took only a few steps to reach it, but each step felt heavy. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. For a second, she considered not answering. But curiosity and a strange pull inside pushed her forward. She unlocked the latch slowly and cracked the door open, just enough to peek. Through standing, there was a man she had never seen before. He was dressed in a dark suit, polished shoes, and carried himself with the kind of presence that immediately demanded attention. His face was calm but serious, and his eyes searched hers as though he had been waiting for this moment. In his hand was a folder, neatly tucked under his arm. "Good morning," he said politely, his voice steady. "Are you the young woman who paid for an elderly lady's meal at the diner last night?" Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked, unsure of how to respond. Of all the things she had expected to hear, that was the last. How did he know? Why would anyone come to her door over something so small? For a moment, she considered denying it, just to make him leave. But honesty came naturally to her, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, that was me." The man's lips curved into the faintest smile, though his tone remained formal. "My employer would like to meet you. He asked me to bring you to him." Confusion washed over her. She stepped back slightly, gripping the edge of the door. "Your employer? I think you have the wrong person. I just paid for a meal." It wasn't anything big. The man shook his head firmly. "It was something big. At least to the person you helped. And to the person who heard about it. My employer insists on meeting you. He asked me to come personally." Her mind spun. Employer? Who could it be? Was this some sort of trick? She looked at the man again. His suit was crisp, his shoes polished, and his manner respectful. He didn't look like someone who would play games. Still, her instincts told her to be careful. "I don't even know who you are," she said cautiously, her voice trembling just a little. He straightened his back and gave a small bow of respect. "My name is Daniel. I work for a man who is very well known in this city. A man of means who values loyalty, respect, and kindness above all else. Last night, you showed kindness when no one else did. That's why I'm here." Her heart pounded harder. She had no idea what to say. She thought about the elderly woman in the diner. Could this be connected to her? Was the man saying that the woman had told someone about her? None of it made sense, yet deep down, she felt this was no ordinary coincidence. She clutched the doorknob tighter, her breath uneven. "And what does he want with me?" she asked softly. Daniel's eyes softened, though his tone remained calm. "To thank you. And perhaps, to offer you something you never expected. He only asks that you come with me for a short while. You'll be safe. I promise you that." The young woman hesitated, her mind battling between fear and trust. Every instinct screamed that this was unusual, but something in the man's voice, something in his steady gaze, made her believe he was telling the truth. She glanced back at her small, worn-down apartment. She thought about her bills on the table, her life that seemed stuck in endless struggle. Maybe this was crazy. Maybe it was risky. But maybe, just maybe, this was the moment her life was about to change. Taking a slow, deep breath, she nodded faintly. "All right. I'll go." Daniel gave a small nod of approval, stepping aside to let her gather her things. As she closed her door and followed him down the narrow hallway, her heart thudded wildly in her chest. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just another ordinary day. Her story was only beginning. Start with part 4. ChatGPT said. The ride to the estate felt surreal. The young woman sat quietly in the back of the sleek black car, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The city streets rolled by outside the window, familiar yet distant, as if she was being carried into another world. She didn't ask many questions. Part of her was too nervous to speak, and part of her feared what the answers might be. Daniel, the man in the suit, sat across from her. His posture was straight, his expression calm, and though he didn't say much, his presence felt reassuring, as if he was used to guiding people through moments just like this. After what felt like a lifetime, the car turned off the main road and down a long driveway lined with tall trees. At the end stood a grand estate, the kind she had only ever seen in magazines or on television. Her breath caught in her throat. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, the gardens were perfectly trimmed, and the sheer size of the place made her feel smaller than ever. She wondered what on earth someone like her was doing there. The car stopped, and Daniel opened her door with a polite gesture. "This way, please," he said. Her legs felt unsteady as she stepped out. The air was different here, quiet, heavy with the scent of flowers and freshly cut grass. She followed him up the steps and through the large wooden doors, her heart pounding with every step. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, paintings lined the walls, and the floors were polished so perfectly she could see her reflection. She felt out of place, almost like she had wandered into a dream she didn't belong in. Then she saw him. At the end of the long hall stood an older man, tall, with neatly combed silver hair and a presence that filled the room without effort. His suit was simple yet elegant, and his sharp eyes softened the moment they fell on her. He stepped forward, his voice steady but warm. "So, you are the young woman I've been waiting to meet." She swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "I don't understand. Why am I here?" The man smiled gently. "Because of what you did last night. You may think it was small, but to me, and to someone very dear to me, it meant everything." Her mind raced. The elderly woman at the diner. "Yes," the man said, his voice firm but tender. "She is my mother." The words hit her like a wave. She stared at him, stunned, her thoughts scrambling to make sense of it. "Your mother?" He nodded. "My mother enjoys going out without anyone knowing who she is. She prefers to live like an ordinary person, to see how the world treats her when no one knows her name. Most of the time, people ignore her struggles. But you didn't. You stepped in when no one else did. And for that, I owe you more than you realize." Her chest tightened as she remembered the scene in the diner, the trembling hands, the coins scattered across the counter, the eyes filled with both shame and gratitude. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because her heart told her to. And now, standing in this grand estate, she realized just how far that choice had traveled. The man's voice grew softer. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who helps without expecting anything in return? This world has grown fast, cold, and selfish. But you reminded me that true kindness still exists. My mother spoke of you with such respect, with such emotion, that I knew I needed to meet you myself. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. I didn't think it was a big deal. I just wanted her to be able to eat in peace. And that is exactly why it matters, the man said, his gaze steady on her. Because it came from your heart. No camera, no audience, no reason except compassion. That is worth more than all the wealth in this house. She stood silently, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. All her life, she had struggled quietly, wondering if her actions mattered, if kindness ever truly made a difference in a world that often overlooked it. And here was proof her small act had not only mattered, but had reached places she could never have dreamed of. The man gestured toward a seat, inviting her to sit. I cannot let this go without showing you my gratitude. I don't know your struggles, but I can see the strength in your eyes. My mother saw it too. That strength, that goodness, it deserves to be recognized. Her heart raced as she sat down, unsure of what he meant. Gratitude? Recognition? She wasn't used to those words being directed at her. She was just an ordinary woman who worked long hours and lived quietly. But in that moment, she felt something shift, as though the universe itself had opened a door she never expected. The man leaned forward slightly, his voice calm yet certain. Your kindness has brought you here. And now, I want to give you something in return. Not because you asked, but because you deserve it. The man leaned forward slightly, his voice calm yet certain. Your kindness has brought you here. And now, I want to give you something in return. Not because you asked, but because you deserve it. She stared at him, her breath uneven, her mind spinning. What could he possibly mean? What could a man like him offer to someone like her? Her life was about to take a turn she could never have imagined. The room fell into a stillness that made every second feel heavier than the last. The young woman sat on the edge of the chair, her hands folded nervously in her lap, her heart beating so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. She had never imagined her small act of kindness would bring her here, face to face with a man whose world was nothing like her own. Yet here she was, waiting, unsure what would come next. The older man leaned back slightly in his chair, his sharp eyes softening as he studied her. He wasn't looking at her clothes or her worn shoes, not at the signs of her struggle. He was looking deeper, at her character, at something money couldn't buy. After a pause, he said, I believe people reveal who they truly are when no one is watching. Last night, you showed me who you are. That's worth more to me than all the business deals I've made in my life. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling as she spoke. I didn't think much of it. I just couldn't let her sit there, embarrassed like that. I know how it feels to not have enough. And that, he said firmly, is exactly why it matters. You did it because you understand struggle. You did it because your heart wouldn't allow you to look away. He stood then, slowly, his presence filling the room. Walking to a large window, he gazed out at the gardens before speaking again. My mother told me about you in detail. She described your gentleness, the way you tried not to draw attention to yourself, the way you comforted her without expecting anything. She said it reminded her of the values she taught me when I was young, and I cannot ignore that. Her throat tightened, and her hands curled slightly into fists against her knees. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet, waiting, her eyes fixed on the floor. The man turned back toward her, his voice steady and calm. I want to help you. Not as payment for what you did, because kindness cannot be bought, but as a way of honoring what you've shown me. You've proven that true compassion still exists, and I want to make sure someone like you has the chance to live without the weight of constant struggle. Her head shot up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Help me? I don't understand," he smiled softly. "I know you live modestly. I know life has not been easy. I have the means to change that. Whether it is education you wish to pursue, a business you dream of starting, or even just the peace of not worrying about your bills, I can provide that for you. All I ask in return is that you never lose the kindness that brought you here." For a long moment, she was silent, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. The thought of having her struggles lifted, of being given a chance at something better, felt unreal. Tears welled in her eyes, and she tried to blink them away, but one slipped down her cheek. "Why me?" she whispered. "There are so many people out there. Why me?" He stepped closer, his voice calm and gentle. "Because you remind me of what truly matters. You had nothing to gain, yet you gave. That is rare. And rare things must be treasured." Her lips trembled, and she covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being seen like this. Most days, she felt invisible, just another face in the crowd, just another person fighting to get by. And yet here was someone powerful, someone who had everything, telling her that her small action had value greater than gold. He placed a small envelope on the table in front of her. "This is only the beginning. Inside, you'll find what you need to start fresh. But the real gift I hope to give you is not money, it's the reminder that kindness will never go unnoticed." Her hands shook as she reached out, but she didn't open the envelope. Instead, she looked at him, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to thank you. You already have," he replied softly. "By being exactly who you are." Silence lingered between them, but it wasn't empty, it was full, alive with the weight of something neither of them would ever forget. When she finally left the estate later that day, the sun was shining brighter than she remembered. The world around her felt the same, yet she felt different inside, stronger, seen. As she walked back through the city streets, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand, she understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could ripple into something far greater than anyone could imagine. It all began with one simple meal,